The first thing Nurse Veda Ostrowski noticed about the man in room 14 was not the prosthetic leg propped against the wall, or the tangle of IV lines mapped across his forearm, or even the way his jaw tightened every time a cart rolled past his door. It was his hands. They never stopped moving, slow, deliberate circles against the mattress edge, like he was trying to keep track of something only he could feel. She had been working the behavioral health unit at St. Clement's for 6 years. She knew what that kind of stillness really was. Not calm, readiness. His chart said, retired Army Ranger, 2 tours Afghanistan, 1 Iraq, traumatic brain injury, 2019, right leg below the knee IED, Kandahar province, admitted for observation following a mental health crisis flagged by his VA outpatient coordinator. He had refused to speak to the intake nurse, refused the standard orientation interview, refused dinner. His name was Callum Ryder, 44 years old, and the only thing he had said since arriving 7 hours ago was directed at the man who tried to remove the olive green duffel bag from the foot of his bed. Touch that bag and I will end your career. The man, a second-year resident named Patton, who had apparently never worked a veteran ward before, had laughed, assuming it was an exaggeration. Veda had been passing in the hallway. She had stepped in, placed her hand lightly on Patton's shoulder, and said, in a tone that left no room for debate, "Leave the bag." Patton left the bag. He also left the room, grateful for an excuse. Ryder had not looked at her then. He had not thanked her. He had simply returned his attention to whatever he was watching through the window. The parking lot, the yellow security lights, the nothing outside. That was at 7 p.m. By midnight, Veda was still thinking about his hands. She had grown up watching her father come home from things he didn't talk about. He had been a Navy corpsman, 2 years in Vietnam, and then 30 years of something else entirely. Hardware store, church choir, Tuesday night bowling, but she had always known that underneath the ordinary life was a man who never completely left the jungle. He flinched at car backfires until the day he died. He slept on his back, arms at his sides, like he was waiting for orders. He couldn't stand the sound of a helicopter. He never talked about it. But she had learned to read it. The way a person carries tension in the shoulders. The way eyes move in a room before anything else moves. The way stillness is not the same as peace. She had gone into nursing partly because of him, partly because of the way she had watched him drift away from people who genuinely wanted to help him because the help kept coming in forms he couldn't accept. Too loud, too cheerful, too many questions. Too little understanding of what it meant to have been somewhere that rearranged the architecture of who you were. She was not going to be that kind of nurse. At 12:15, she knocked on room 14's door and pushed it open 6 inches. Standard check. He was sitting exactly as she had left him, upright in the bed, the duffel bag at his feet, hands moving. Just checking in, she said. No clipboard. No chart. She'd learned years ago that a clipboard in your hands tells a person you're there to document them, not talk to them. He said nothing. You didn't eat, she said. I'm not going to push you on it. But I can get you something that's not from the cart. There's a vending machine on the 2nd floor that has these peanut butter crackers that are actually halfway decent. A pause. The ones in the orange package? She blinked. It was the first thing he'd said to her directly. Yeah. Those have been in there since the Clinton administration. She almost smiled. They're preserved by science, basically immortal. He didn't smile, but something around his eyes shifted by about 2 degrees. She filed that away. She didn't push it. She said, I'll be around if you need anything, and pulled the door back to 6 inches and walked away. The bag was the issue. She understood that before she read the 2nd page of his intake notes, because she had seen it before, not the specific bag, but the specific weight of it. Every veteran she had ever worked with who carried something physical into the hospital like that was carrying it because it was the last thing left that still made sense. A link to a version of themselves that still felt coherent. When she finally read the notes more carefully, at 2 a.m, she found out what was in the duffel bag. A dog. Not literally. The dog, a 5-year-old Dutch shepherd named Compass, was being held at the admissions desk because hospital policy did not permit animals in behavioral health patient rooms without prior approval from the unit director. The prior approval process required a 2-business-day review period. Compass had been surrendered at check-in without Ryder apparently fully understanding what temporary hold meant, and now the dog was in a carrier in the security office, and Ryder was in room 14. And the distance between them was the length of a hospital corridor and a policy written by someone who had never worked a veteran ward. Veda set down the notes. She sat with it for a moment. Then she went and found the intake paperwork. Compass was a certified psychiatric service dog, licensed under the Americans with Disabilities Act. He was registered, documented, up to date on vaccinations, trained by a nonprofit that worked exclusively with combat veterans and had been doing so for 11 years. His documentation, all of it, was in a plastic sleeve in the front pocket of the duffel bag that the resident had tried to take away. Veda had been the one to stop that from happening without even knowing why it mattered yet. She pulled up the hospital's service animal policy on the unit computer. She read it twice. Then she read the ADA guidelines. Then she read the unit director's standing orders for behavioral health admissions. The policy was clear. A certified service animal could not legally be denied access to a patient without medical justification documented by a licensed clinician. Not administrative preference. Not departmental custom. Medical justification, in writing, signed. There was no such documentation in Ryder's file. Compass had been separated from his patient not because of policy. He had been separated because of assumption. Because the intake nurse, a travel nurse filling in for 2 weeks, new to the floor, had looked at the dog and looked at the behavioral health ward and made a call that was not hers to make. Veda looked at the clock. 2:47 a.m. She thought about Ryder's hands and the way they never stopped moving. She thought about her father, who had gone to sleep every night of his life with a specific object on the nightstand. A folded photograph, always the same one, and how once, when her mother had moved it while cleaning, he had walked the entire house at 3 in the morning before he understood why he couldn't settle. She picked up the phone. The night security supervisor was a man named Buford, who had worked at St. Clement's for 19 years and had approximately 0 patience for bureaucratic nonsense after midnight. "The dog has paperwork," he said. "All of it. Certified, registered, current, and there's no medical order excluding him?" "Nothing." Buford was quiet for approximately 4 seconds. Then he said, "Give me 10 minutes." It took 8. Compass came down the hallway at 2:55 in the morning, and Veda walked him to room 14. And she knocked and pushed the door open, and she did not say anything, because there was nothing to say that would be better than what happened next. Ryder looked up from whatever darkness he had been sitting inside of for the past 8 hours, and then he was not sitting anymore. He was on the floor, on his knees, both arms around the dog, his face pressed into the fur at Compass's neck, and the sound that came out of him was not the sound of a man who had been inconvenienced. It was the sound of something releasing that had been held far too long and far too tight. Compass stood absolutely still and let it happen. Veda stepped back into the hallway and pulled the door to 6 inches and stood there for a moment in the fluorescent quiet of 2:56 in the morning. And she did not write anything in the chart about what she had heard. Some things belong only to the person they happen to. By morning, the unit director knew. His name was Dr. Whitmore. Gordon Whitmore, 53, the kind of administrator who believed that the primary function of a policy was to protect the institution from liability rather than to serve the patient. He had held the director position for 8 years. In those 8 years, Veda had watched him override clinician judgment 4 times in cases she knew of personally. And in each case, the override had been documented as an administrative clarification of protocol rather than what it actually was. He appeared on the unit at 7:15, which was 15 minutes before Veda's shift officially ended, and she suspected the timing was not accidental. "Nurse Ostrowski." He did not say good morning. "My office received a report regarding an unauthorized animal access incident on this floor last night. Compass is a certified psychiatric service dog," she said. The documentation was in the patient's possession at intake. There was no medical order excluding him. The protocol for behavioral health admissions requires director-level review before any service animal is admitted to a patient room. The ADA does not require director-level review for a certified service animal. It requires medical justification for exclusion, in writing, from a licensed clinician. Whitmore looked at her with the particular expression of a man who was accustomed to nurses becoming quieter when he looked at them that way. "You are a floor nurse, Ostrowski, not a policy analyst. I'm the nurse who read the policy," she said. and the federal law. There were two other nurses at the station. Neither of them looked up from their screens, but Veda could feel the quality of attention in the room shift. "This will be addressed in your performance review," Whitmore said. "That's your right," she said. "But Compass is staying in room 14 until a licensed clinician documents a medical reason to remove him. I'll be happy to show you where to sign that order if you'd like to write one." Whitmore left without writing the order. She should have gone home. Her shift was over. She had been awake for 13 hours and her feet ached in the specific way that only hospital floors produced, a kind of deep concrete complaint that started in the heel and moved north. She stayed, not on the clock. She just stayed. She sat in the break room with a cup of coffee that she didn't particularly want, and she thought about the fact that what had happened the previous night was not an isolated incident, and she knew it wasn't isolated because she had watched it happen before. Not to Ryder specifically, but to the patient in room 9 the previous March, to the woman in room 3 the October before that, to every person who arrived on this floor already stripped down to the bare minimum of what they could bear, and then found themselves navigating a system that treated their needs as inconveniences requiring approval. The travel nurse who had taken Compass at intake was not a bad person. She was someone who had not been trained, working a floor she didn't know, following a custom that had calcified into something that looked like policy, but was not. The custom needed to be challenged, not in the break room, on paper, in writing, with dates and documentation, and the specific language that made it impossible to dismiss. Veda opened her laptop. She wrote the incident report herself. She wrote it with the specificity of someone who had spent 6 years learning exactly which words made a hospital administration pay attention. She cited the ADA. She cited the VA's own guidelines for service animal access. She cited 3 peer-reviewed studies on psychiatric service animals and their documented efficacy in PTSD treatment. She included the timeline. She included the fact that Ryder's documentation had been present at intake. She included the name of the travel nurse and a note that the error appeared to be the result of inadequate training rather than individual negligence. She did not include the sound she had heard through the door at 2:56 in the morning. Some things stayed where they belonged. She sent the report to Whitmore. She CC'd the hospital's patient rights coordinator, the veteran services liaison, and the legal compliance office. Then she closed her laptop and drove home and slept for 6 hours. When she came back for her next shift, there was a message from the patient rights coordinator asking for a meeting. There was also a message from the Veteran Services Liaison, a retired Army colonel named Sergeant, Major Elgin Foss, who had held the position for 4 years and who said, in a voicemail that was approximately 45 seconds long, that he had been trying to get the service animal policy revised for 2 years and had Veda ever considered coming to the board meeting. She had not, until now. There was also a message from Dr. Whitmore, which she did not return. Ryder was still on the unit when she came back. He was sitting in the chair by the window instead of in the bed, which the behavioral health team told her was a meaningful shift. Compass was on the floor beside him, one paw touching Ryder's foot. She knocked. She did not push the door open this time. She waited. "Come in," he said. She pushed it open. He looked at her with a steadiness that had not been there the night before. Not warmth, exactly. Not openness. But present. He was present in a way that he had not been. "You're the one who brought him back," he said. It was not a question. "The paperwork was there," she said. "It just needed someone to read it." He looked at her for a long moment. Then he said, "What's your name?" "Veda," she said. He looked at Compass, who lifted his head and then laid it back down on his paws. He looked back at her. "My last handler," he said, "before I got out. Her name was Veda, Sergeant First Class Veda Thorne. She pulled 2 guys out of a vehicle that was on fire. She never made a big deal about it." He paused. She didn't make a big deal about anything. Veda stood in the doorway and said nothing for a moment because there was nothing she could improve on. "I'll let you rest," she said. "I'm not resting," he said. "I'm just sitting here trying to figure out how to tell the therapist that I'm not actually crazy. I just need things to make sense." "That's not crazy," she said. "That's veteran." Something moved across his face then, not a smile. Something older than a smile, something that lived underneath it. Recognition. "Yeah," he said. "That's one way to put it." The meeting with the patient rights coordinator was 3 days later in a conference room on the 4th floor. Whitmore was there. So was the legal compliance officer, a woman named Priya Nair, who had the particular quality of attention that told Veda she had already read the incident report twice and formed her own opinion. Whitmore presented his position first. The service animal protocol existed to protect patients from potential disruption. The behavioral health unit had unique considerations. The director-level review process was a reasonable safeguard. Priya Nair let him finish. Then she said, "The question I have, Gordon, is where in the ADA the director-level review is authorized as a condition of access for a certified service animal." Whitmore began to explain that hospital policy. "I'm asking about federal law," she said pleasantly. There was a long silence. Veda had brought documentation. She presented it without theatrics, without emotion, without anything that could be characterized as confrontational. Dates, times, the intake record, the dog's certification, the absence of a clinical exclusion order, the ADA language, the VA guidelines, the 3 studies. She also brought something she had not initially planned to include. She had gone back and pulled the admissions records for the past 3 years, looking at behavioral health patients who arrived with certified service animals. There were 11. Of those 11, 7 had experienced delays in reunification with their service animal ranging from 4 hours to 48 hours. 3 of those patients had documented adverse events, meaning they had deteriorated clinically during the separation period. 1 had attempted self-harm. She set the paper with those numbers on the table and did not say anything because the numbers said it. Priya Nair looked at the paper for a long time. Then she said, "I think we have some work to do on this policy." Whitmore said nothing. The policy revision took 6 weeks. Veda was part of the working group. Foss from Veteran Services was there. Priya Nair was there. 2 floor nurses from other units were there. Whitmore attended the first meeting and sent his assistant to the remaining 4. The new policy was clear. Any certified service animal arriving with a patient had the right to remain with that patient unless a licensed clinician documented a specific medical reason for separation. The documentation requirement applied to exclusion, not to access. The burden was reversed. It was not a dramatic change, written out in policy language. It was 17 lines in a handbook that most staff would never read all the way through. But it meant that the next person who arrived at that intake desk with a certified service dog and a brain that was trying to hold itself together would not spend 8 hours in the dark without the one thing that helped. Veda thought that was probably worth 6 weeks of meetings. On the day the policy was finalized, she got a text from a number she didn't recognize. It said, "Compass says thank you." Ryder, she sat with her phone for a moment. Outside the break room window, the parking lot was ordinary in the way it always was. Cars, yellow light, the nothing outside that she had watched Ryder watching that first night. She thought about her father, the photograph on the nightstand, the way he had walked the house at 3 in the morning looking for something he couldn't name until he found it. She thought about how the smallest things could be the whole thing when you were trying to hold yourself together with what little you had left. She texted back, "Tell Compass he did the hard part. I just read the paperwork." 3 days later, a card arrived at the nursing station addressed to the floor generally, in handwriting that was careful and slightly uneven. The way handwriting gets when the hand doing the writing has known a different kind of pressure. It said, "To the night staff of behavioral health, and especially to Nurse Ostrowski. In 22 years, this is the first time a hospital felt like someone was actually paying attention. It matters more than you know." She pinned it to the board above the nursing station between the shift schedule and the reminder about mandatory flu shots. It stayed there for a long time.